Morning, everyone. We've got a number of people joining, so I'm just going to give it a few minutes to let everybody in from the lobby. But welcome to the second webinar in our 4 webinar series on every Wednesday of November. My name's Chris Lloyd and I'm Secretary General for RUMA Agriculture. And unfortunately, they gave me control of some of the buttons today, so you'll just have to forgive me. We should be letting everybody in without needing to be announced. There we go. So, good morning, everyone. As I said, my name's Chris Lloyd, and I'm Secretary General for RUMA Agriculture, and I'll be chairing today's session. Before we move on, there were just a few bits of housekeeping to share. The webinar is being recorded and will be published on the RUMA Agriculture website as soon as we can after the session. We should have everybody's microphones and cameras turned off if I've got the settings correct, but just in case, please check that your microphone's off and your camera's off as well. We have a lot to share today, and due to the limited availability of some of our speakers, we actually have some pre-recorded elements to today's webinar. This means that our live speakers today are limited, or access to them, but we do have the Q&A function turned on, and if you have any questions for any of the speakers or the presenters from the VMD in the recorded sessions, please do leave your questions in the Q&A and we will pass them on to the speakers for them to consider them after today's session. But just to manage your expectations, it's unlikely that we'll be able to answer those questions today. So our webinar is entitled The Future for Vaccine Availability for the UK Animal Health Market. And as I've said, this is the second in a series of 4 live webinars that RUMA Agriculture is delivering this month. Our first webinar last week was a panel session, and we considered some of the current opportunities and challenges influencing the responsible use of medicines. And we have 2 more to come. Next week, we have the RUMA Agriculture Targets Task Force 2 final report. So that's the end of our 5-year phase 2 for TTF. And the VARS report from the VMD, which gives us information on the veterinary antibiotic retail sales and surveillance. That's on Wednesday the 19th at 11 AM. And the final webinar on Wednesday the 26th of November will be the 3rd phase of targets, TTF3, the new targets that the sectors are setting for the next 5 years. We hope you can join us for those, but if not, they will be recorded and you can watch them on our website. Back to today, and our focus is on vaccine availability for the UK animal health market, which is a topic that RUMA Alliance members have been increasingly raising with us over the last few years. I'm going to hand over shortly to the RUMA Agriculture Communications Manager, Mary Bourne, who's going to share with us the results of a survey we carried out earlier this year to understand more about the vaccine supply situation in the field at grassroots level. We're then really lucky to have a manufacturer's perspective from MSD, delivered by Rebecca Fusselman, who's the plant manager for the MSD UK facility at Milton Keynes. We then have 2 pre-recorded sessions, a presentation from Claire Stratford, who's the Principal Veterinary Advisor, and she's also Head of the Research, Innovation, Sustainability and Evidence team at the VMD. And she's going to be giving us details of the VMD's proposed 5-year strategy. And that's followed by a Q&A session, which I did with Claire and Suzanne Eckford, both of the VMD, where we discuss a range of questions about both the vaccine strategy and its journey ahead. So to our first presentation, I'd like to introduce Mary Bourne, who is the RUMA Agri Comms Manager, and she's going to be sharing the results of the vaccine survey we carried out earlier this year. Mary, I'll hand over to you.
Thanks, Chris. Good morning, everyone. Great to see so many people here today. I'll just load up the screen. Chris, if you can just confirm when that is on screen, please.
Yep, we can see that fine. Thanks, Mary.
That's brilliant. Thank you. So, as Chris said, earlier this year, RUMA Agriculture carried out a survey. And I guess just to manage expectations, it was a very top level survey. It wasn't designed to be in any way kind of scientific. But we wanted to do this to try and build a deeper understanding of what's happening on the front line. And as Chris said, at grassroots, with the availability challenges surrounding vaccines. As we all know, vaccines play a key role in safeguarding the health and well-being of animals, and therefore limited or no supply, which is something that has been reported more frequently over the past few years by numerous livestock sectors, can have widespread implications on animal well-being. And that could include, for example, an increase in antibiotic use to manage conditions that may otherwise have been prevented with vaccinations. So that kind of brought us to the point where we as RUMA Agriculture were hearing from our members and other stakeholders about some of these shortages, and we wanted to try and do something and build like I said, a deeper understanding. So back in early May this year, we developed a set of questions and launched those. And our target audience was to gather information from vets, farmers and SQPs, otherwise referred to as animal medicines advisors, because we know they are certainly on the front line of prescribing and advice around vaccinations. So hopefully that just gives you an initial kind of picture and background as to what was driving us to do the survey. So moving on now to start to share some of the results. We had a great response across the various stakeholder groups, and you can see on screen a breakdown. We had 191 respondents overall, and we hadn't got any benchmarks, so really anything over 100 we were really pleased with. And as you can see there, we had a spread of SQPs, farmers and vets, and we had some that selected other, and when we dug a little deeper, those were roles generally in kind of more of a management or general role within the industry. So a good spread from the stakeholders that we absolutely wanted to hear from. So moving on then to some of the responses we got to the various questions. First of all, we were asking about the awareness of any shortages of vaccines and delivery disruption, and whether that has affected your ability to use or prescribe vaccines for the prevention of animal disease across the following timeframes. So we'd heard various bits of feedback about the problem might be getting worse. So this was the rationale for trying to get a bit of a feel for, you know, has it been getting worse over a certain time frame? And we went back to around 2022 as an initial overview, and you can see there that generally there's been a worsening problem in recent years, progressively since 2022. And I guess just to kind of further validate that, we asked a very clear question: is vaccine availability worse now than 5 years ago? And an overwhelming 94% of respondents stated that they felt that was the case. A big part of this survey was also trying to understand not only about the impacts, but also which vaccines in particular were being affected or were in short supply or disrupted supply. And I just give a quick shout out now on the next slide to our colleagues at the VMD who helped us analyse some of the data and have helped us define kind of the top 10 that the survey picked up from the responses. And you can see there what that top 10 list looks like. We also looked across the different stakeholder groups and whether there was a difference in what they were saying, but broadly there wasn't. So across farmers, vets and SQPs, there was quite a lot of consistency in this feedback across the types of vaccines that were in short supply. And as you can see, most of the reported disrupted vaccines are those utilised in the sheep sector. 9 of the top 10 most reported disrupted vaccines are categorised as Category 1 vaccines under NOAA guidance. So again, that just gives us a bit more insight that we hadn't got when we were hearing the feedback initially from the sectors. And I think this, we know that this is going to prove very useful as work continues on developing support in this area. So we also then wanted to explore a little bit more about the impact. So the next question relates to whether the vaccine availability issues have been a limiting factor in the ability to prevent disease in animals under the respondents' care over the past 2 to 3 years. And again, quite a strong response there of 79% that stated that had been the case. And then the next question again is just trying to go into a little bit more detail, and you'll see that we had some more free text answers in this particular case. So this is looking at the negative impacts on animal health as a result of vaccine availability issues. And 66% of respondents said that they have either experienced or are aware of negative impacts on animal health as a result of those vaccine availability issues. And the subsequent question to that was, we asked respondents to elaborate a little bit more if they felt they were able to. And you can see a summary there of just some of those key pieces of feedback that we got. For example, more deaths in flocks and herds, increased abortion, increase in lameness, sudden and unexplained death in unvaccinated herds, increase in use of antibiotics due to increase in, for example, diseases like pneumonia. Also, that lack of immunity being passed on in the absence of vaccines being available and used. And then another point that started to come out was disinterest and apathy potentially on vaccination following supply issues, playing out potentially in a way that might be giving a false sense of security. So if vaccines haven't been available and there hasn't been any immediate issues, then the concern is, when availability is better, will farmers then want to use them again, or will they not feel that there's a necessity to do so, when of course we know that is important. So that's another emerging theme that I think is really important that came out of the survey. Keeping with the impacts, obviously if there are going to be impacts in terms of some of that finer detail we were hearing on the previous slide, then obviously that can also result in financial impacts at farm level as well. And again, we asked this as a free text question broadly, and you can see there loss of livestock as a financial impact by having to buy larger pack sizes, fewer lambs to sell. But I think one of the really telling ones on this slide is a quote that came in, which said, "You do not get paid for dead animals. You have to pay to get them taken away." Very emotional statement, as well as factual in some cases there. And whilst this is a snapshot, and like I said, it's very top level survey, I think that is quite a poignant statement to have received as part of this survey feedback. Some other impacts as well: disease outbreak, and obviously productivity losses off the back of that, the cost of having to implement new vaccine programs as well, or restart vaccine programs, all of which have those financial impacts. That was the basis of this question. And like I said, this is just to give a bit of a snapshot today of the feedback that we got. So moving on then to the question around the current situation with vaccine availability and whether that's had a negative long-term impact on UK animal health and welfare. And you can see there that around that 72% of respondents said they felt it had. Just a small amount said no, and then some people sort of in the middle, around 26%, were not sure. And of course, this is a journey in terms of that availability issue that's been emerging over recent years. But again, some important insight that we got from the survey there. But then sticking with kind of the theme, we started to explore a little bit more whether the lack of availability in the respondents' opinion may have caused an uplift in the use of antibiotics. And you can see there on the top of the slide that a high proportion, just under half, 47%, did say they felt it had. We also had some that were unsure or hard to say there. And may not be aware of any impacts at this moment in time. But then when we asked the respondents to, I guess, look forward and whether an ongoing shortage of vaccines would result in an increased use of antibiotics, you can see that actually the result there is much higher in terms of people saying yes. So I think that, again, reinforces the concern that exists around the disruption in supply. Now, moving on to a UK vaccine strategy. Now, when we first launched the survey back in May, this wasn't something that was formally announced, but of course it is now. So when we asked the question, there was certainly a resounding support for the need for a vaccines strategy of 96%, as you can see on screen there. But since then, a lot of work has been being done by the BMD, various workshops with lots of stakeholders from industry, which has been brilliant. And the VMD have recently issued a statement of intent, which is a UK government framework, and it was published in September 2025, to address the challenges in the availability of veterinary vaccines. And that sets out a strategic approach for cross-sector collaboration to tackle the mismatches in supply and demand, encourage innovation, and try to move from a just-in-time to a more resilient just-in-case supply model. And this will be followed by a 5-year action plan to improve supply, uptake, and innovation in veterinary vaccines. And RUMA Agriculture has been pleased to be working alongside the VMD as one of many stakeholders on this important piece of work. So just coming back to the questions that we were asking back in May, do you feel more investment is needed in vaccines manufacturing? Again, quite a resounding yes on that, and we will be hearing more broadly shortly from the VMD and a manufacturer to talk a little bit more about some of these areas. So we also wanted to explore with our respondents possible solutions, and we didn't want to put them on the spot, but we know on the front line, farmers, SQPs, and vets are dealing with and trying to manage through supply issues as and when they do occur. So we felt it was useful to ask the respondents for some of their views on other possible solutions. And I certainly won't go through all of them, and this isn't all of them on screen that you can see today. But just to pick out some of the key themes, reduction in red tape and trying to bring vaccines into the country, forward planning by manufacturers, and UK-based manufacturing, all very much recurring themes in the feedback that we received. Facilitate use of autogenous vaccines, also looking at kind of quantities and different volumes of quantities available, better planning, efficiency of processes, of manufacturing processes, Also, a very consistent theme was communication, and better communication between all stakeholders, really, across kind of the vaccine manufacturers, farmers and vets, as to when supplies might be in short supply, or when demand on the front line might be coming up, and that all important planning as well. Also, alternative vaccines and making those maybe more easily available, trading relationships, and capacity for manufacturing in the UK was also some consistent themes that came through as well. And then entering the final few questions now, we, as I said earlier, this was about impacts, and there's lots of impacts as we've just covered, whether that's kind of financial, animal health and welfare, but also we know that this can be quite an emotive and worrying situation as well, because everyone wants to achieve the best health and welfare outcomes for animals. So asking the question around whether it's causing concern, worry and stress to the stakeholders that responded, you can see there that, you know, again, a high proportion, 85%, said that it was concerning and worrying and causing stress as well. And then finally, might seem like a very obvious question to ask, but again, we had a very responsive and captive audience. How important are vaccines in protecting the health and well-being of our animals? Of course, we all know that answer, but it's really good to hear that at 95% absolutely feel they are extremely important in protecting health and well-being of animals. So there's a commitment there, and I think an absolute understanding that these are important preventive medicines, and there's a need, hopefully, to ensure that reliable supply into the future. So that's everything on the survey, and I shall now hand back to Chris. Thank you, Chris.
Thanks, Mary. And just to sort of be clear, as Mary said at the beginning, this wasn't an in-depth analysis, a highly technical sort of questionnaire. This was about listening to the RUMA Alliance members who were expressing concerns about availability, and it was about trying to gather some information to underpin or to explain or to give some insight into those concerns. And I think one of the important things is it demonstrated that those concerns were real, but also that it's a really complex issue. One of the complexities within that issue are the manufacturing processes, and that's why I'm really pleased to be joined this morning by Rebecca Filzelman from MSD, who, as I explained, she's the manufacturing plant manager based here in the UK for MSD, and is well placed to explain some of those complications from the manufacturer's point of view in terms of the complex production systems for vaccines. So, Rebecca, I'll hand over to you, and I think you're going to share your screen, so I'll just give you a nod when that comes up. Brilliant. We can see that.
Great.
Thanks, Rebecca.
Yeah, absolutely. So good morning. Really pleased to be here and take all that feedback obviously very seriously. I think the one thing we can all agree on is that we all want vaccines for animals at the right time, when you need them, at the right cost point. So we're united in that journey to make that happen. So just a brief introduction about myself. Rebecca Filzelman. I've been with MSD for about 17 years, always in animal health manufacturing. Worked as a technician and then a manager, led a functional work stream, a small site, and now I'm responsible for MSD UK animal health manufacturing. So really responsible for 3 sites here in the UK, Milton Keynes, Newbury and Gravely. We are the biggest animal health vaccine manufacturer in the UK. And we also do produce the 2 vaccines that have caused the most noise. So I really take this opportunity today to share with you what we're doing, what the manufacturing process looks like, what lead times look like, and essentially how we can work together to optimize that manufacturing work stream. So just a bit of brief background. There we go. So just wanted to show you the site really here in Milton Keynes. So it's been an MSD site since 2011, but you'll probably potentially remember it as a sharing plow or an intervet sharing plow or a host vaccine manufacturer, but through a series of acquisitions, similar vaccines, but now trading as MSD. And this is the site here in Milton Keynes. Apologize, I am having some technical difficulties. There we go. So what do we do here in the UK? We're a large molecule line of business. We focus on aseptic and sterile technologies. So here at the site, we have 6 fermenter lines, and that's used for both aerobic and anaerobic bacteria. We produce about 24 antigens for integrated process teams products, meaning that's the team that creates all the manufacturing for bacterial-based antigens for vaccines. We also produce 8 antigens for IPT2, and IPT2 is responsible for parasitic vaccines. We produce antigens for other sites in the MSD network that go on to further vaccine manufacturing and lungworm. So we do large-scale bacterial vaccines, parasitics, filling, and some secondary and final packaging here in the UK. So quite a big site, mostly end-to-end, and producing here for the UK and other markets. So I just wanted to share, because HeptiVac always creates the most noise, because number one, it's a mainly seasonal product, and you need it when you need it, which we fully understand. But wanted to share really the end-to-end lead time for what it takes to create a single dose of HeptiVac. So we get input from commercial on what they expect that they will sell. So meaning what you expect from a total doses requirement. So we get that and we essentially input it and we figure out what kind of raw materials will we need. So we go ahead and we order those and we begin manufacturing. So some antigens that go into HeptiVac can be really quite quick. It can be a month, but several of the antigens in HeptiVac actually take about 4 months to make because there's a detoxification process that has to occur and has a specific time point or a specific reading for toxicity that must be hit before we can move forward in manufacturing. So I would say manufacturing antigen creates between 1 and 4 months of lead time. When we look at test and release, that takes about 2.5 months. And once we get all of the antigens required to make a batch of HeptiVac, we blend it together. So the blending and filling is actually one of the quickest processes. But then we need to go for QC release. So testing and release of filled vials takes about 5 months, just due to the process of release testing. And then it takes about 1.5 months to pack, release, distribute, get it in the comm ops so that you can order it. So when we look at it, that's about 11.5 months, up to 15 months that it takes to make the antigens required for HeptiVac. So I'm not going to go through too many details here because if you're a fermentation specialist, you might enjoy talking about processes, but just wanted to show you a little bit at this bottom here. We'll talk about, we open a seed vial and start to grow the antigen, and it goes in a small fermenter. And when it gets to a certain concentration, we put it in a large fermenter. It goes through a clarification step, a depth filtration step here, and then it goes into our processing vessels, which will be processed through size-dependent ultrafiltration, and then another filtration process, and then sterile filtered. So tip to tail, all of the antigens that go into HeptiVac follow this process. Some do go up here for those detoxification, like I shared, where it can be between 1 and 4 months that they sit in those holding vessels. to get the correct toxicity level before we can move on. And then Chovii, which is a big component of HeptiVac, goes through a different process because we need both the cells and the toxin to prevent diseases that is also part of that. So just a really high level, but just wanted to show you that it is, when we talk about 1 month, this is all the steps that it's going through. And those ones that do go into the detoxification vessels up here that are, 1 to 4 months, once they're detoxified, then they come down and they follow this process. So our fermenters are about 2,000 liters. That's our smallest production fermenter, to 3,000 liters. And all said and done, when we start with 2,000 or 3,000 liters, we concentrate it down. And when we get to this step, these are individual bottles. These bottles are 40 liters. So from 2,000 to 160 liters is where we take the antigen that we need for the vaccine. So you can see it then becomes quite concentrated, and then it moves for further manufacturing. So just to give you an idea, just some photos, so it kind of helps you imagine what that looks like. On the left-hand side, that's the top of our fermenter vessels. So everything is done inside the vessel closed system to ensure that we're hitting GMP manufacturing and get a quality product. The middle is, you see these 2 rigs at the back. That's a depth filtration system. And then on the right side, you'll see those are those vessels that I talked about where antigens may wait between 3 and 4 months for detoxification. So we will sample them during that time, get a result from QC, and either continue to wait or take the next step into filtering it. And this is the filtering process. So in the middle there, you'll see that UF rig, or ultrafiltration rig, that I talked about. That is a size, it's essentially size exclusion. So we keep what we want, which is the liquid portion where the toxin is, and we get rid of the cells. So HeptiVac is a bit of an interesting vaccine because on certain antigens, we want the cells and the toxin, and certain antigens, we just want the toxin or the liquid portion in which the bacteria has excreted what we're looking for. And then in the most right-hand picture, that is where 2 of the final filtration steps will happen. So we get additional clarity for the product through one of them. And then the final one is sterile filtration into the final container that it'll sit in before blending. So you can see it is quite a long process from a manufacturing standpoint. And this is just the upstream, well, I'll call it upstream or antigen manufacturing. It also has downstream processing with it. But once the antigen goes into that final vessel, then it will go for QC testing. And once QC testing is off, then we will be able to move forward to blending. So I will explain that process. So one thing that you may or may not know is that HeptiVac requires 20 specific antigens to make the vaccine. So when we talk about, maybe I'll go back to this. When we talk about this process, we have to have 20 different batches go through this same process in order to make one batch of HeptiVac. If you want to talk about Ovivac, it's the same thing, except we reduce that by 3 specific antigens. So Ovivac and HeptiVac are very, very close from a processing standpoint. Ovivac is just a bit simpler. So as you can see, this process is really complicated to grow bacteria, clarify it, and sterilize it for sterile vaccine. But we have to do this 20 times. And as you can imagine, things do happen. We may get a lower potency. So we have minimum potency that we have to hit by VMD dossier regulations. And if a potency doesn't hit that value, that batch of antigen can't be used. So you can see how complex this manufacturing process is when we have a 20-way vaccine that prevents 7 diseases. So once we have the antigen, we have all 20, right? We're going to take it to the blending process. So Heptivac and Ovivac require a precursor blend. So we take a vaccine base, and what we do is we add all of these specific Chovii cells and toxin to the mix. So there are 5 different Chovii fractions that go into Ovivac and Heptivac, and we require the cells from them. So meaning it goes through a centrifuge and we collect all the cells. And then we also collect the toxoid that goes through that depth filtration and sterilization process. So we mix both the cells and the toxin together, and we get what we call a Chovii pre-blend. So we call that an LCAB here, but it's basically a combination of all the Choviis, which is the precursor for making Heptivac and Ovivac. So once we make that pre-blend for Chovii, we will put it in sterile bottles and we'll hold it. We need to wait for QC testing. And once the QC testing comes off and tells us that, yes, everything that we put in is hitting the potency we expected, it will give us an output for how strong this LCAB is and how many doses of vaccine we can make off of it. So the next step then is to create a vaccine base, which is essentially your gel and sterile salts. We add the Chovii pre-blend to that, and then comes all of the other antigens. So you can see here that this is quite a long list, your Mannheimias, your hemolyticas, your perfringents. So it is quite a list of additional antigens. And a lot of the antigens, they look the same, but you'll see like that A1, A2, A6, those are all different serotypes of a specific bacteria. So we blend those together. We make a 20-way vaccine, and then it's filled, which we said, yeah, filling happens in 1 day, but then the QC testing starts, and the QC testing is roughly between 3 and 5 months. It depends on how the test goes, but quite a big piece of the overall puzzle. And then ultimately, we can release it, and it goes to ComOps for vaccination. So just really wanted to highlight the complexity. We hear you. We want to be able to deliver vaccines in time and cover the whole market. But it is quite a specific process in order to make this specific vaccine. So I know there are questions about, well, we make it in the UK, but where does it go? So I also wanted to share with you the markets that Heptivac goes to. And then I also did Ovipass because that just shows you a little bit of a different flavor. Ovivac goes to the same markets as Heptivac. So you look that obviously we are a UK manufacturer, really producing majority for the UK, actually, UK and Ireland. But it is registered and it does go to other markets around the world. So these actually are just a sampling of the countries that we serve from the UK. Our most countries served by one product is 27, and that's in our poultry range. So we also do poultry products from Milton Keynes as well. So just wanted to give you a bit of a flavor of where these vaccines go around the world and what markets are supplied locally from Milton Keynes. So I hope today was just maybe a brief overview, try to keep it succinct. I could talk about vaccine manufacturing for quite some time, but wanted to share with you the labor of love it is for us to get you the vaccines that you desperately need, and really hope that we can continue to have that conversation on what could be better, what could it look like, and how you can play a part in giving us, a good lead time and as much information as possible, so that when you think about that dose of Heptivac that's there, you also know that we probably produced all the antigens for that at least a year ago in order to do that. And I wanted to also share with you that just because Heptivac is a seasonal product, more or less, we are making doses throughout the entire year. Because the process is so complex and we only have 7 fermenter trains, at any given time, we're making roughly 5 batches of antigen a week that will make its way to one of your vaccines. So I really appreciate the opportunity to come and speak with you from a manufacturing viewpoint. I know that it is a frustrating situation for you as a farmer who wants the product, but we are very much aligned with the science of healthier animals and doing what we can do from a manufacturing perspective to make it as easy for you as possible. So thank you very much, Chris.
Thanks, Rebecca. And thank you again for joining us today and for that presentation. It's not every day we get to understand the detail and complexity of the process which goes into producing the vaccines, which we risk taking for granted. And my first point to you is really, I think you should change the name of your title to Vaccine Master Chef, because it feels like
it
really
feels
it's
like a bit of a Tetris game, for sure.
Yeah. Well, you used the word puzzle. I wrote that down, and it is a puzzle, isn't it? Trying to bring all of these pieces together. And I think that's a standout for me, that it's a minimum 12-month process for the vaccines that we want to use at Lamington. You're starting that process a year ahead. I noticed that you're sending a lot of your vaccines abroad. And you may not want to answer it or be able to answer this question, but has Brexit complicated that process for you in terms of getting access out of the country? And I presume it would be the same for people bringing things in.
Yeah, I mean, it definitely presented a new opportunity or a new problem to solve, right? As a manufacturer that's a global manufacturer and supporting, really 6 continents worth of animals, we obviously have worked with our EU colleagues at one of our sister sites to see, what would it look like for us to optimize that, right? Because at the beginning of Brexit and to this day, essentially, like any product going into the EU needs to be tested in the EU. So we've taken some of those opportunities to kind of have a reciprocity agreement that'll be tested in the EU, and it will also then be valid for the UK markets. So essentially, I think everyone saw the challenges that would arise out of this decision, and it was really, how can we work together to make sure that that doesn't impact the customer? So while that was a challenge, and can still be a challenge on certain things, it doesn't prevent us from getting you the vaccines that you need.
The companies have adjusted and have worked through those issues. Rebecca, I just wanted to say, do you want to click on the stop share button just so that we can bring you up? Unless you had any other slides you were going to share. That's it. I can see you. Brilliant. Another tricky one you may not be able to answer, or the answer may be very complicated, but our survey talked about autogenous vaccines. And I know in some sectors, like the fish industry, the trout industry, for instance, they're really important because they don't have a lot of antibiotics to use. They don't have a lot of medicines licensed for fish. But and in the back of my head was a time when I was a sheep farmer, and you could get a CLA vaccine made for the strain of CLA you had. But how complicated is it? Is that a realistic thing that we could do that on any scale, autogenous vaccines?
So I think, autogenous vaccines definitely have their time and place in the market. MSD actually does, which is different than autogenous, but does do some mRNA vaccines in the US. Mainly that's around swine, and now they've launched this year companion animals, so cats and dogs. Similar but different process than autogenous. But autogenous and mRNA vaccines are really kind of a script vaccine. They don't really hold a large scale like Heptivac does, right? So in some ways they're really prohibitive because you're going to need to have a vet who does a swab to get it genotyped and then create, if it will, grow in cells. Now, not all bacteria will grow in every cell model. So you do see some autogenous vaccines right now for sale in the US by the USDA. but is by veterinary script only, and they don't necessarily guarantee the efficacy. So I do expect that there will be more autogenous vaccines and mRNA vaccines in the future, but they most likely won't be at the large scale that we see HeptiVac because of the unique kind of herd-specific immunity that autogenous vaccines usually give.
So the other clear thing is that what the business you're in, your plant is clearly not making nuts and bolts. It's a lovely shiny factory with the cleaning bill must be a fortune, but you're not producing nuts and bolts. It's a very live process, and I imagine you have really strict protocols and operating procedures. But despite all of the best things that you alluded to in your presentation, things go wrong. Again, stating the obvious, this isn't like a batch of biscuits and you can sell the broken ones for a knockdown price, or a piece of furniture that's scrapped and then you put a yellow sticker on it. If a batch fails, it fails. It's gone. It's in the bin, presumably.
Yeah, I mean, I wish we could. But you know, at any part of the good manufacturing practices, if it doesn't meet a specification, it doesn't meet a potency, a toxicity, a quality release test, there's no path forward for it. And that really, it does two things. One, you can say it's very restrictive, but two, it also gives you the highest quality product and you know that what you're getting meets all of the specifications. So really that is a consumer protection and also a high stamp of quality on any vaccine that you buy, that it has met a very stringent release process and it is the very best that you can buy.
And I heard in your presentation there that planning is absolutely paramount to running your plant. I thought of this question before I heard it was a year-long lead-in period, so probably we can't answer this question. I'm not quite sure what the answer to this question is going to be, but from the producer end, everything you do is planned in, but obviously you need to know the eventual demand. You need to know how many vaccines I want. And the classic one, I suppose, is our deputy chairman who works for the Animal Health Disease Association, Animal Health Distributors Association, would have been chairing this session today, and he uses the classic example of the farmer runs to his country store, leaves the engine running, and he says, "I need my vaccine because I've got the sheep in and want to vaccinate them this afternoon." That clearly isn't great planning. But I'm not quite sure how we can give you 12 months notice. That's going to require more kind of strategic planning from the likes of AHDB, etc.
So absolutely, right. We can't react to huge market swings. What we can do, though, is we can work with our commercial colleagues that give us a sales forecast, where essentially that's market research, that's talking to distributors and farmers on what they project that they're going to use. They compile all that information and they give us a year looking forward, where they believe, you know, based on experience, based on the data they have on hand, and based on kind of probabilities and statistics, how many doses they think they can sell, right? So they're held to the account of how many doses they think they can sell. We translate that into how many doses we can make. And the hard part is, does it get to the shelf on the day that that farmer wants the vaccine? So it is a complicated process. There is area for opportunity, but I think what we would ask then is you work with like your vet tech, your local conglomerate, that you work together to really be a voice for how much of that vaccine do you think you're going to have? How has your herd changed over the years? Where are you going? Right, to get as much information through the commercial chain so that they can give us their projections, and we can work on what we can do to meet that demand. So we can't change quickly, but we're always producing, right? So it's not like we just start every year. The year just never stops for us. So that 12-month lead time really is if I started today. right? So every day we're making antigens that will go into a vaccine. So we're not starting at the 11.5-month point. We're starting for some vaccines at the antigen point. Maybe we need 1 or 2 batches of antigen, and we go then forward to blending. So while it is a long lead time, and that is the pace of it, there is opportunity in the small sense for the better we know, the better we can do.
I want to call the Q&A to an end because we need to move on, but I just wanted to make that point clear. I think that's certainly something I take out of this, the planning. If the more we can do from the user end to support manufacturers with that information, the better. And you talk about opportunities, and that kind of leads us into the next session of our webinar really nicely, the opportunities for how we try and address this issue. And it's not about pointing fingers at anyone particular, it's about how we can all come together to try and make the availability and supply of vaccines better. So Becky, I just want to thank you very much. Not every day we get an opportunity to see inside your world, but thanks for sharing that with us, and please stay with us for the rest of the webinar if you have time.
Yeah, thanks, Chris.
Thank you. So that takes us on to the sort of the final section of our webinar, really. And RUMA and its alliance members have been sharing their concerns about vaccine availability with the VMD over the last couple of years. And via a series of workshops the VMD organised, they've listened to those concerns. We all understand the issues is complicated, and we've just talked about the manufacturing side of it, but there are more complications than that. But that doesn't mean we can't try to improve the situation. So RUMA was really pleased to see the statement of intent announced by the VMD in September of this year. Unfortunately, those involved from a senior level at the VMD were unable to attend the webinar on the day that we set it because of diary clashes, but they were keen to be involved. And so we've recorded a presentation which shares details about the government's response to our concerns over availability, which was set out in September's statement of intent. So this presentation is by Claire Stratford. She's the Principal Veterinary Advisor to the VMD, and as I said earlier on, she's Head of Research, Innovation, Sustainability and Evidence at the VMD. Mary, could I ask you to play Claire's presentation?
Yes, I can.
Recorded presentation.
I can. Just to say to everyone, the sound is slightly on the low side on Claire's recording, so please do make sure that you've got your own microphones as high as you can take them. So I'll get that playing now, Chris.
There we go.
Is that coming through, Chris?
I can see it, but I can't hear it. Best laid plans of mice and men.
We'll go again.
Health industry to better understand the vaccine availability issues that the UK market has been facing, and to develop a strategic approach to start to collaboratively address these issues. In this short presentation, I will cover the background and engagement activities that led to this UK veterinary vaccine availability initiative, the recent publication of the Statement of Intent on UK veterinary vaccine availability, and a summary of the contents of this statement and the proposed strategic framework for action, and the next steps to develop a multi-stakeholder UK action plan for vaccine availability. So, starting with the background that led to and informed the Statement of Intent, concerns regarding vaccine availability were initially raised by the sheep sector, which led to the VMD convening the first vaccine roundtable discussions in November of 2023. This meeting led to further engagement activities with wider stakeholders from different sectors, including surveying marketing authorization holders to understand the extent and causality of any supply issues with their vaccines, meetings with representatives from different species groups, with regulators from other countries, and with government colleagues to understand related activities and opportunities. From these activities, we gained a better understanding of the landscape, and it became clear that vaccine availability was a wider problem than impacting just the sheep sector. instead impacting multiple species and multiple sector groups. The VMD therefore convened a second roundtable in February of this year with wider stakeholder representation. And the aim of this second roundtable was to agree the key issues and promote co-ownership of solutions from across the animal health sector, recognising that we need collaborative activity across the sector to address what we recognise as a multifaceted problem. At this second roundtable, we collated potential solutions and commitments to inform the next steps, and there was collective enthusiasm for some form of multi-stakeholder national strategy or action plan, which the VMD agreed to champion and coordinate. So from here, we collated all the information and feedback from these engagement activities and proposed what we termed a strategic framework for action. We then sense-checked this with stakeholders from across industry and government at a series of workshops in May. This then informed the drafting and content of the Statement of Intent on UK veterinary vaccine availability, which, following the appropriate ministerial clearances, was published on gov.uk in September of this year.
And here is a screenshot of this Statement of Intent on UK veterinary vaccine availability, which was published as a policy paper on gov.uk, and you can find the associated web address at the bottom of the screen. We're delighted to have received support for this work from Baroness Hayman, as can be seen in the ministerial forward. We believe that the Statement of Intent has been received positively, and we're very grateful to all the organisations that helped amplify the message and the publication via their own communication channels, as you can see from some of the examples on this slide.
So for those that haven't yet had a chance to read the document in any detail, what is the Statement of Intent? Essentially, the Statement of Intent is a document authored by the VMD, but reflecting all the feedback and information we've received from our engagement activities across the animal health sector. It details what we understand about current vaccine availability issues and how we hope to address these in a collaborative way, working with stakeholders from across the sector. It outlines the need for veterinary vaccines, the concerns over vaccine availability, the longer-term vision for future vaccine availability, and importantly describes this strategic framework for multi-stakeholder action and what the next steps are to develop an associated national action plan. The aim of this Statement of Intent is to show the required direction of travel for future action, to signal intent, foster collaboration, and act as an impetus for the wide cross-sector engagement that is required for success. And I'll now provide an overview of each of those sections.
So firstly, looking at the need for veterinary vaccines, which I'm sure is really clear for everyone on this call, but obviously vaccines are essential tools to protect animal health and welfare, and in doing so they underpin livestock productivity, food production, food security, and both the farming and the wider economy. They also help protect public health, for example, by reducing the risk of transmission of some zoonotic diseases from animals to humans, and they're a really important part of our antimicrobial stewardship toolkit, helping us in our One Health efforts to reduce antimicrobial usage to minimise the development and spread of antimicrobial resistance. On top of this, we expect our need for veterinary vaccines to grow, for example, due to new disease incursions secondary to climate change, which we've seen recently with blue tongue, and risks posed by increasing global movement of people, and animal products. And importantly, we've also witnessed the negative impacts of lack of vaccine availability, many of which are reported in the RUMA vaccine survey that you've heard more about this morning, and not least the negative impacts on farmer and vet well-being of seeing disease in their stock that could potentially have been prevented if appropriate vaccines had been available.
Moving next to the concerns over vaccine availability, it's important first to recognise that vaccine production is a very complex biological process with multiple points of potential failure and multiple interconnected influencing factors that can determine the availability or uptake of a particular vaccine. And this diagram depicts this complicated process from initial vaccine research and development through product authorization, manufacture, and then distribution, to wholesale, then prescription, and finally use in an animal. In addition, often supply chains for veterinary vaccines involve multiple different countries, with different stages of manufacture and packaging happening in different countries. And the final product is often intended to serve several different markets. On top of this, there are various potential influencing factors seen in the green circle that can affect availability and uptake of a vaccine. And these include social and economic influences, disease pressures, competing demands, trade agreements, and usage policies. I think it's important that we keep in mind how complicated this is and that there are different nuances for each individual vaccine that we have on the market, meaning that different vaccine availability issues may require different solutions. We also know from our engagement with colleagues in other countries that the UK is not alone in facing vaccine availability issues, and that many of these challenges are felt globally. Our stakeholder engagement identified two key issues. Firstly, supply not meeting demand for some existing vaccines, and a number of people watching today's webinar will have been directly impacted by this. And secondly, stakeholders reported concerns over a potential lack of development and innovation of new vaccines to fill existing and emerging therapeutic gaps. The statement of intent then goes on to describe how the veterinary medicine sector in the UK is a private industry in which developing and bringing vaccines to the market is a commercial decision, and there is a complex interplay where adequate uptake of vaccines is required to generate sufficient market pull to incentivize industry to manufacture these products. So we need uptake to promote availability, but we also know that lack of availability in turn leads to reduced vaccine uptake and a lack of confidence in purchase. So there's a need for us to think more here about how we can start to better demonstrate the potential market for these vaccines in the UK to promote availability. Then there's a description of existing national and regional efforts to promote vaccine availability that are already underway, to describe the existing landscape of activities that future work should attempt to amplify and build on.
Moving on to the wider vision, we need safe, effective vaccines available at the right time to prevent disease in our animal population and minimise use of antimicrobials. The statement of intent aims to illustrate how work by stakeholders from across the animal health sector in the short to medium term will help make progress towards this wider ambition by establishing and supporting multi-stakeholder networks, both nationally and internationally, to enhance awareness and oversight of vaccine availability issues, by improving our communication mechanisms regarding when supply will not meet forecast demand, particularly for what we consider to be critical vaccines, by promoting fair distribution and uptake of available products and supporting sourcing of alternatives where appropriate, by stimulating innovation to support the pipeline of new products and technologies to address current challenges and new disease threats, and by better understanding the current manufacturing landscape and identifying any potential opportunities for future growth or diversification. So then moving on to how stakeholders might realise this ambition, the Statement of Intent proposes a strategic framework for multi-stakeholder action with activities divided into 4 interconnected strategic themes, which are improve supply and uptake, support innovation, review the manufacturing landscape, and underpinning all of these, the theme of working in partnership. And you'll see that there are various proposed work streams under each of these themes, many of which start with addressing knowledge gaps. Our research and engagement activities so far have generated a lot of information regarding the current vaccine landscape, but we still need further detail in some areas to ensure that we direct our future activities appropriately. So just to provide a little flavour of the suggested work streams and activities under each of these strategic themes, the improved supply and uptake theme aims to use improved communication to mitigate supply issues for existing products, whilst also laying the foundations for more resilient and transparent supply and uptake of future products. And suggested work streams include addressing knowledge gaps by research to better understand the causes and scale of existing supply issues. Another important activity will be to work with sector groups to define and agree critical vaccines, i.e. vaccines for which we consider shortages to be of greatest significance. and this will help us refine our activities so that we can concentrate our forecasting, communication and mitigation activities on these prioritised critical vaccines. Other work streams include looking at potential opportunities to safeguard supply, for example, by requiring the provision of shortage and mitigation plans. They also include facilitating the sourcing of alternative products where appropriate, for example, via the Special Import Scheme and the Autogenous Vaccine Authorisation or AVA provisions, and looking at ways that we can demonstrate an enhanced market pull to provide confidence to pharmaceutical companies that they can achieve sufficient return on investment. And it's hoped that the work streams and activities under this improved supply and uptake theme will improve stock control of existing products in the short term, and that this work will be complemented by work to augment the pipeline of new product innovation and manufacture from the support innovation and review manufacturing landscape themes. So the support innovation theme aims to facilitate the pipeline of new products required to address new and emerging therapeutic gaps. And suggested work streams include bridging the gap between end users and innovators and funders by working to identify our market needs and then communicating these to innovators and funders to stimulate investment in associated vaccine research and development. Other work streams include ensuring that our regulatory framework continues to support innovation of new products and technologies whilst providing the necessary safeguards of quality, safety and efficacy. The review manufacturing landscape theme aims to evaluate current UK vaccine manufacturing capability and capacity and potential opportunities for longer term growth to support more resilient and responsive future vaccine production. And it will also look to identify potential future alignment opportunities with human vaccine research and manufacturing and understand the benefits and risks to such an approach. And these themes are underpinned by the need to work in partnership with stakeholders both nationally and internationally to promote awareness of the issue, collaboration, action and global influence. And the first major activity under this work in partnership theme is to translate all of these suggested work streams and activities into a detailed 5-year multi-stakeholder UK action plan. So this takes me nicely onto my next slide in terms of next steps, and you can see where we are in the process to date. So we've been through the collate information and engage phase to publishing of the statement of intent, and we're currently in a new phase of multi-stakeholder engagement, convening representatives from across the pharmaceutical industry, including distributors, prescribers and suppliers of medicines, government, farming and companion animal groups, with the aim to determine the process through which this 5-year multi-stakeholder UK action plan will be developed, governed and implemented, with the aim to publish this action plan within the next year. So in terms of developing the action plan, as I've stated, our aim is to develop and publish a 5-year action plan by September of 2026, and the VMD will be working to champion and coordinate this action plan development alongside our existing regulatory functions. And it's important to recognise that success can't be achieved by the VMD alone, and that this will require active participation from stakeholders from across the animal health sector. Our next activities are therefore to encourage this multi-sector participation in development and delivery of the action plan. This means putting concrete activities with clear timelines, endpoints and owners to the work streams and strategic themes I've just discussed. And we're actively seeking feedback to help shape these next steps of action plan governance and development. We hosted a workshop with industry representatives in mid-October who largely supported our proposed approach to action plan development with a few tweaks, and we're planning similar meetings across government and with academia and researchers to also get their feedback. So now talking you through our proposed approach to action plan development and delivery. Firstly, thinking about the governance or oversight of the action plan, our proposal is that this is provided by an advisory group made up of invited independent key opinion leaders from across the animal health sector, so including research, government, manufacturers, representatives from the distribution chain, vets and animal keepers, with the idea that this small group would help provide strategic input into the direction and priorities of this vaccine availability initiative, and really importantly, link this work into the wider landscape of animal and One Health strategies and plans and potential funding sources. We also see that this advisory group playing a key role in championing the action plan and its activities, making sure that information is disseminated widely. We haven't landed on the exact number, but we envisage having about 12 individuals on this group, and that the group would meet a couple of times a year, probably more frequently than that in the early stages. Moving on to the content of the action plan itself, for the supply, innovate and manufacture themes, we envisage facilitating one or more workshops per theme over the next 6 to 8 months, involving the wider spectrum of stakeholders who are prepared and able to commit to supporting action plan development and delivery. And the purpose of these workshops will be to tease out the exact activities, deliverables, timelines and ownership that will be detailed in the action plan. And we can have as many of these workshops as needed, and we'll try to do them as flexibly as we can. We then envisage there being an action plan working group, which would then act as a driver for tracking and reporting against these agreed activities within the action plan. And representatives on that will act as points of contact for their sectors, both gathering and disseminating information. We envisage that this working group would meet 3 to 4 times a year, but again, potentially more in the initial phases of action plan development.
In addition to this, for the supply theme, we're envisaging establishing what we're terming a stakeholder dialogue platform, basically a mechanism of connecting stakeholders. And the purpose of this will be to specifically focus on enhancing communication and sharing of intelligence regarding the supply chain. We can use it to help develop and agree mitigations to issues that have arisen or are anticipated, and to help agree what information needs to be disseminated and where. So we see it both as a source of intelligence that would also inform some of the action plan development and delivery, but also as a means to address and mitigate specific supply issues. In addition to these structures, we envisage hosting annual stakeholder information and networking events where updates on action plan delivery will be presented, and there'll be an opportunity for discussion and feedback on the challenges that have been experienced and on opportunities that have arisen. In addition, we hope to create a SharePoint site or similar, which will enable us to host resources and disseminate relevant information that will be accessible to all those people who are participating or who have registered an active interest in this vaccine initiative. So this is our initial start of a 10 of the proposed approach, and we're actively seeking feedback on it now. You'll notice I haven't specifically mentioned the working in partnership theme, but we see that as being embedded in what we're doing now and through the process that we're developing. The VMD have agreed to coordinate and champion this work, but as stated before, the success of the initiative will be dependent upon action from all impacted stakeholders. We've already invited industry organisations to start to consider which workshops or groups that they might wish to be part of, and have started to collect a straw poll of that information. And over the next month, we'll be reaching out individually to those organisations to get further information regarding their potential involvement.
So just looking at that pictorially now, you'll see that the first activities will be to establish the advisory group and to run the supply, innovation and manufacturing planning workshops. These in turn will inform the development of the action plan working group and the stakeholder dialogue platform, with the aim to publish the action plan in September of 2026. The advisory and working groups and stakeholder dialogue platform will continue through the 5-year life plan of action plan delivery, and alongside those are the proposed annual stakeholder events, which will form just one part of a wider communication initiative. And finally, whilst all of that planning is happening over the next 12 months, I think it's important to stress that we recognise that some people are facing live vaccine supply issues now, and that alongside the action plan development activities, there's a need for some work to commence immediately in parallel. Some such activities are already happening, and we're really grateful for the RUMA vaccine surveys, both the agriculture survey that you've heard more about today and the companion animal and equine one, both of which seek to better understand vaccine supply issues and impacts. From a VMD perspective, alongside our action plan coordination activities, we're undertaking and looking to commission research to address some of the knowledge gaps I've spoken about. We'll be better utilising the new legislative requirement for pharmaceutical companies to report national shortages to us, and we'll be issuing communications to clarify opportunities for use of alternative products where supply issues exist, for example, by utilising the Special Import Scheme or AVA provisions. And we hope to see similar parallel activities happening across the wider animal health sector, and we'll look to how these activities can be best communicated to demonstrate progress. So that's been a bit of a whistle-stop tour of the Statement of Intent and our Vaccine Availability Initiative, but I hope it gives a flavour of the work to date and the intended direction of travel. I'd like to acknowledge the organisations on this slide who all had representatives that participated in the engagement activities that informed and discussed the Statement of Intent, and hopefully those on the webinar today can recognise organisations here that they are members of and through whom they may wish to participate in this work as it moves forward. Finally, in summary, we recognise and understand the concerns regarding vaccine availability, which have led to this new National Veterinary Vaccine Availability Initiative. We see the publication of the Statement of Intent as an important step forward. The next step will be to capitalise on the momentum as we start to build the action plan over the next 12 months. Also with those ongoing parallel activities to address some of the more pressing current issues. I've highlighted that this is a complicated process and that success will be dependent upon multi-stakeholder input and communication. We're very much in the early stages of this work, so the proposed approach I've presented is very much a start of a 10 and will be subject to change as the process moves forward and evolves. We would very much welcome any feedback, and I understand that RUMA is kindly going to collate any feedback from this webinar and send it to us. Hopefully you'll understand that we're not in a position to respond individually to feedback, but are always grateful for such feedback and can assure you that it will be taken into consideration as we progress with this initiative. Thank you very much for your time.
Thanks. So Mary, if you can, so that was recorded a couple of weeks ago, and we also recorded a Q&A. Obviously they were only the questions which we thought of. We haven't got we didn't have a live audience, but I think I've seen one of the questions in the Q&A that we've had today about getting to the bottom of why this has become more of an issue. And I think you can see from the breadth and scope of the proposed action plan that this is intending to get to the bottom of why this has become more of an issue in recent years, but not just why, but also to try and deal with the pinch points that that process identifies. I think what also comes out of the presentation, it's clear this has to be a team effort right across the industry, from government, manufacturers, stakeholder organisations, farmers, vets. We all need to play a part to contribute our ideas, to contribute what we can in terms of better communication and so on. And the VMD are very open, as there was a list of organisations there, and Claire made the point that you should be able to see something, an organisation you're connected to. But if you feel you've got something to offer this process, the VMD are very open to organisations or individuals signing up. So if you haven't registered your interest, please do so. You can do that through RUMA by contacting me, contacting us. I'm happy to forward that on. If you have any questions, as Claire said, put them in the Q&A and we'll happily pass them on. So Mary, have you got the Q&A bit lined up? We'll move to that then. Thank you.
I have, Chris. Just bear with me 1 minute.
So welcome to this pre-recorded Q&A on vaccines, and I'm delighted to be joined today by Claire Stratford, who's Principal Veterinary Advisor at the VMD, and Suzanne Eckford, who is Head of International Office at VMD, and they are both co-steering the VMD's activity on the Vaccine Availability Initiative. Thanks for joining me today, and apologies we couldn't have you on live, but understand one's not in the country and the other person had already been pre-arranged when we chose the date. So great to have you here today. Claire, that was a great presentation, and I think that takes us through the detail of the statement intent and the activity that will happen. But I just wanted to acknowledge, really, on behalf of the industry, our gratitude to the VMD for listening. So there's been the industry's come to you with a problem, and I think this is a great example of the government and industry working together. we've shared our concerns, you've listened to them, and that is really where the statement of intent came from. And I can certainly speak on behalf of RUMA Agriculture, and I think also RUMA Companion Animal and Equine, our sister organisation in the companion animal world. We're keen to work with you in any way we can to, as I'm sure other elements of the industry are, to try and make the best of what we can out of this initiative. There is a problem. We all know it's complicated, really complicated. So it's not a given that there will be a successful outcome to this. We all have to join and participate in that. So hopefully that sets us up for some of the questions. And I really just wanted to, having seen the presentation, having been involved in some of the more intimate workshops that you've held, I think it would just be useful to share some of the detail with our wider audience today. So can you talk us through the time frame for the vaccine availability initiative? You've outlined some of the steps there and some of the detail, but could you talk us through some of the timeline?
Sure, I'll kick off with this one. So I think we're right at the start of the journey. It's the early days, but as Claire's outlined in the presentation, this stage we're at currently is all about getting lots of stakeholder input into the whole process of developing an action plan. We envisage that taking place over the next 12 months with an aim to publish around about September 26th, so next year. And following that, we envisage those activities that have been put in place in that action plan to take place over the following 5 years. So we're looking at a 6-year process for timeline for this initiative. But I just want to bring another angle to that, because that feels like a really long time when you say, well, 6 years, and you've heard, Chris, and we certainly hear that people are saying right now we've got some problems with vaccines. So I guess just to reassure, this isn't a case of we're just sitting doing thinking caps on for 12 months before anything starts. Some of those live current supply issues are certainly going to be addressed, as we have already been doing over previous months and years. We work as a regulator to try and enable access as far as we can. So we ourselves are starting to do some work already at the moment. We are trying to fill some of those knowledge gaps that we've outlined and that Claire's again highlighted in the presentation, looking at mapping out the landscape of current research in this field, looking at what the funders are doing, trying to get a good landscape of what's already out there, and then also starting to do things like flesh out the type of data that we want marketing authorization holders to supply to us under those new mandatory reporting requirements that have come out in the latest revision of our legislation. So those are some things that we're doing, and we're really hoping that others in industry like RUMA and others, and certainly you've got this webinar, for example, and you recently have run a survey which has been really helpful. So that work that others are doing, we hope will also take place in parallel to that action plan development. But the process for, I guess, the next big publication will be the action plan, and that's, like I said, next September time.
You've set me up perfectly for my next 2 questions, Suzanne. Thank you. You've made it clear that this is not all entirely in the gift of government or indeed the VMD, and I think because of the complexity we understand that, and that you absolutely see other elements of the industry contributing to it. And as I said initially, RUMA are here willing to help and contribute to in any way we can, and right across the alliance you'll have our support. How do you see other elements of the industry contributing to this?
Yes, I'll take that one. So as outlined in the statement of intent and in the presentation, we all know this is a complicated problem, and it's a long-standing problem, and that it's going to require all different parts of the industry to contribute in order for us to make progress. And that, if you think about the supply chain, that's a massive industry. So we're looking from initial research, the pharmaceutical companies, manufacturers, distributors, prescribers, and farmers and end users. And we need all of those participants and stakeholders and their respective member organisations to be represented. I think a lot of the required activities that we'll start to map out are going to be around improving our communications and sharing intelligence so that we have more transparency regarding potential shortages. We have better utilisation of available stock. We know that some shortages aren't down to a national shortage of product. It's just due to that product not necessarily getting to the places where it needs to get to. I definitely see that there's potential for improved forecasting of need, to have positive impacts, both what we see as our need for vaccines now, but our anticipated need in future as we start to see new disease incursions, and thinking about, you know, commitments to purchase. How can we make that market pull or certainty for what's a commercial industry more solid? Alongside this, you know, we're developing a national action plan, but we need to recognise this is a really complex global issue. So supply chains are global. Very little manufacture happens here within the UK. Most vaccines that we use in the UK are also being distributed to other markets. And we know from speaking to our regulatory counterparts in other jurisdictions that other countries are seeing the same issues as ours. Some of those same issues will share the same causality and therefore the same, I guess, potential responses and solutions, and some will be different. But part of this collaborative approach will be everybody reaching out to their respective international partners to understand what the situations are abroad, whether there are any barriers and challenges that we share in common, what are the opportunities for collaboration. And I think the other thing in terms of this whole sort of multi-stakeholder collaborative approach is it's important we don't look at vaccine availability issues independently or in isolation. You know, vaccines are part of a much greater holistic picture with regards to animal health and welfare. We need to, where we can, reduce our reliance on vaccines where that's appropriate through improved biosecurity, animal welfare, etc. So there's lots of other conversations that need to be happening across the industry around this vaccine availability initiative.
Yeah, I think that's really important that we do look internationally, because there might well be some lessons we can learn there. As you say, Claire, it's a global issue. We're not on our own in terms of facing some of these problems.
Actually, sorry, Chris, I just want to add some other angles to this as well. You know, the UN, for example, because we know there's a lot going on across the international community, more widely than just regulators already, because it's such an impactful issue, not least in relation to addressing really big public health and animal health issues like AMR, the antimicrobial resistance, you know, and that's been a really good driver for the wider kind of community to understand why it's such a big issue that we have availability of vaccines at the right time, at the right place. So we have a member of staff seconded to the World Organization for Animal Health, and she's supporting work at that global level. And I absolutely watch this space, because there'll be more coming out from the UN agencies around like that kind of international drawing together of different sectors and stakeholders at that kind of international level, which will complement and will work with and align with that at the national level as well.
Yeah, and coming back a little bit, Claire, I take your point. This is a complex issue. We have to see vaccine availability in the round of good nutrition, good biosecurity, ensuring hygiene, good management practices generally. I absolutely get that, but just coming back to your point, Suzanne, I think we are almost a victim of our success in agriculture, in that we have absolutely bought into the value that vaccines can bring to that mix of animal health, welfare management, medicine, veterinary medicine use. When you look at other elements of society where, you know, we're not going to go there and talk about COVID today, but there has been suspicion, there has been resistance, there hasn't been the same acknowledgement. And I think back to the NOAA guidelines that sort of categorise vaccines as category 1s and category 2s. The category 1s are kind of like the no-brainers. If you're in that industry, why aren't you using them? And the category 2s are more complicated in terms of the individual farm story. But generally, I think it's a good thing that agriculture's embraced them. Kind of takes me on to my next question. In the vaccine survey, the responses we got, the survey was carried out earlier in the summer, and we've just seen the presentation from that earlier in this webinar. But that showed that the disparity is not equal across the entire industry. I think there are elements of problems in all of the sectors. Certainly when you have one of your earlier vaccine workshops, people from every sector were saying, yes, we've seen a bit of an issue, but the noise is louder in certain elements of the industry. So I suppose that kind of leads us to, are there going to be any priority areas? Will we be seeing, will we have to do more work in certain areas than other areas? Well, when I say areas, perhaps species even.
I think that's a really good question. I mean, I think you were really kind enough to share some of the outcomes from your survey with us, Chris, which is looking at kind of, you know, seasonality flagging up as potentially a big issue here. But I think one of the things that we found, Claire and I, in terms of working through the feedback from stakeholders and whilst we've been writing this statement of intent, has been that there's quite a lot of knowledge about the generalised issues that affect vaccines. But when we drill down into the specifics per vaccine per species, there's a lot of nuance within that. And I think what we really see the need for is a bit more detailed information at that nuanced level. You know, seasonality of vaccines may well be an influential factor, but you know, there may be other things that come into play, like, for example, different vaccines, some are harder to make than others. You know, some have processes when you produce them are more likely to go wrong. And so I think there's a lot of nuance within there that we need to understand better. And that's definitely some of the work that will be up front, you know, kind of in as we go forward over the coming year. But I think what it also points to is that what people need to be proactive and to mitigate upcoming issues is the right information at the right time. So there's a whole piece here about the communication. I think you've already alluded to this, about people having a better forward look, but not just having it themselves, sharing that information with the other people that can help do something about that and mitigate that problem and look for solutions in a sufficiently timely manner that they are in place before the problem occurs. And that's, you know, it's a tough nut to crack, but that's definitely what we're aiming for. And I think, you know, what Claire's outlined in her presentation around having this stakeholder dialogue platform would be a way that we're looking to try and bring together the right information for the right people at the right time to help address that. I don't know if you wanted to add anything to that, Claire.
Yeah, I think just on your question, Chris, about prioritisation, I mean, certainly we have hundreds of vaccines authorised, and we're going to have to, if we're thinking about trying to safeguard the supply of those, we're going to have to drill down into a smaller subset. And, you know, we've explored in the statement of intent and the potential activities as we move forward, these prioritisation exercises. So considering prioritisation of what we might consider critical vaccines or critical products, and where we might consider priority diseases for which there are no current authorised vaccines, and that, you know, we need to narrow down our list to then take activities forward. I don't think we yet have in mind the exact criteria upon which we would determine those prioritisation exercises, and that's something that we'd be looking to do, you know, with wider stakeholders. I think the RUMA survey results are really interesting because certainly it does look like the sheep sector in particular is badly impacted at the minute, and the vaccines that they can't get hold of are in the most part the category 1 vaccines that you reference, Chris, where, you know, we absolutely see the need for those. So there is going to need to be that piece looking across to see, you know, where do we concentrate our efforts first, and then, as Suzanne's spoken to, better understanding the individual nuance of the supply issues associated with those vaccines in particular.
I'm sitting here no longer farming, I declare, at the moment, but when I was a sheep farmer, I suppose I was part of the problem and not the solution, because I was guilty of turning up at my local country store 2 weeks before I wanted my clostridial vaccines and I took availability for granted. And I suppose that's the thing that's come out of the conversations I've listened to for the last couple of years. For whatever reasons, we can't take that availability for granted. And if I was still farming, I think I would be thinking about how do I give my supplier that information earlier in the process. I don't know what that would be. Maybe that's something you were talking earlier on about what other elements of the industry can give to this. That's something that certainly RUMA could take on board with its alliance of members.
Yeah,
my last question. Oh, sorry.
No, sorry. Thanks, Chris. I was just going to echo that, because we know that, you know, vaccine production and manufacture is a commercial situation. Companies need to know that there's a market for their product, and we also know it takes time to make, you know, batches of vaccine. They're very complicated biological products. So exactly that, you know, knowing that there is a market and knowing sufficiently far in advance the size of that market to then influence production chains and scheduling, absolutely, we see as being beneficial. And I think that's certainly something that we would want to understand better from manufacturers, the type of information that they want, and the type of lead-in time that they need. And then, yes, certainly look to RUMA and other organisations to help, collect that information.
Yeah.
I just want to jump in, sorry, just to add to that as well. We get carried away, Chris. I'm so sorry, because I feel quite passionately about the subject. We've talked a lot here about kind of end users and manufacturers, but actually, let's not forget about the research community, and not forget about kind of the wider kind of spectrum of players that come into the field of funding research and of amplifying research, because what we also hear is when we go and talk to different individual groups and stakeholders is they're not talking to each other, or they're talking to a very limited section. So when we have conversations with the research community, there's prioritised exercises that have gone on and have been published, but they have mainly focused on the wider research community. Well, there's a real opportunity here to bring some of those players together, and not just to address immediate supply issues, but also to address that other second pillar of the statement of intent, which is around how do we future-proof those therapeutic gaps that some which we already have and some which we might be facing into in the future. So I think that's the comms really runs as such a strong thread through all of this work.
Yeah, and sorry, also just to jump in on that, exactly, and that speaks to this.
I will have to stop you in a minute.
Prioritisation of products, but prioritisation of diseases for which we want to see products developed, and communicating that to researchers. And the other thing that we've not talked much about, but is uptake of vaccines, and better understanding the barriers and drivers for uptake or use of vaccine when it's available, because that's a whole other segment that drives availability. The greater the uptake, that then becomes a stimulus for availability. But obviously it's a reciprocal arrangement that works both ways.
And without giving too much away, that usage thing, Claire, is something we will be looking at as RUMA. We do a focus on certain subjects, and we're intending to work with NOAA to do a focus on good vaccine utilisation, so good storage, the right product at the right time, right way of application, etc., etc. So I think there's a lot we can do to make sure that where we have vaccines, we make the best use of them. Suzanne, you set me up nicely just now talking about communications, really, for my last question. So I think you've done a pretty good job of reaching out to the key core stakeholders in the industry. But if there's someone out there listening to the webinar today who feels they have something to contribute and perhaps haven't been involved in the process so far, how can they get in touch?
Okay, so we've said repeatedly that we want this to be a really collaborative process, and clearly we do. We've got to be a little bit careful because of the reality factors to just how many contact points we can liaise with in one time. So I would say I would encourage anyone who feels like they're not involved to maybe look and see whether any of the stakeholder groups that they're part of, so for example, if they're a member of RUMA or if they're a member of some other organisation that is already contributing, to reach out to their kind of contact point within the organisation and make sure their ideas are fed in through that contact point. But obviously, if you've got stakeholders who are listening to this who are not part of one of those organisations or are not aware as to whether or not their organisation has been involved, then they can either reach out to us directly, or potentially, I guess, Chris, maybe RUMA could field some of the questions if it's your core stakeholder group, and we'll certainly take that on board. And we're keen to make sure that there are no stakeholder groups that are not being represented there, or when I say groups, I mean also organisations. So that's absolutely welcomed, and then we'll include those additional contact points as we move forward with some of those processes that Claire set out around the planning workshops and the other structures that will operate this initiative through. We're also going to operate a wider comms programme, because we talk about comms so much through this process, because there's the kind of comms about this initiative, which is important, and we're going to be looking at having things like some type of external web page or landing page or SharePoint site through which people can access kind of information about what's going on in the initiative specifically. And we will be hosting, stakeholder workshops as the action plan is being delivered, so that people can stay aware of what's happening under it. But in terms of the wider comms piece, there's a lot more to do. There's a whole comms piece about just raising awareness about how important veterinary vaccines are. I know we've talked about the fact that lots of people are aware of it, but I think there's always wider reach, and it's really important that we get that kind of recognition about the issues that are occurring and how important it is to resolve them. In those other wider forums, the public health forum, for example, those wider kind of forums which can really lend kind of power to what we're doing and can really make sure that it's woven into other strands of activities which will give it more weight and more kind of funding, for example. Getting involved in some of those wider funding initiatives would be really important. So we need to raise the profile of it, and that's something for everyone to do throughout the kind of groups that are supporting this work. So I hope that covers some of those angles off. I mean, we definitely need a common strategy, and that's going to be developed alongside the action plan as one of those strands of that. But there will be kind of, work underway over the next year as well to make sure we're getting messaging out there.
Well, just to reassure you, RUMA will be very happy to share in any of those communications, and we've I think we've made the point there that the stakeholders, all of the stakeholders you've contacted, will be keen to follow the progress, I think, of this. So I know you don't have all of the answers today, but as you develop those communications, as you say, Suzanne, we'll be keen to help. And for the 35,000 sheep producers out there, please contact NSA or NFU to input your concerns or your interest, because I'm sure you don't want 35,000 emails ending up in your inbox when you get back from your travels. Ladies, thanks very much. I think I'll draw our Q&A to a close today. That's been a really useful bit of additional insight into what we think is a really important initiative for the industry, what we hope will be a very successful initiative in terms of improving the situation for vaccine availability in the future. But we don't underestimate the challenge, and we completely understand that it's not all in your gift, and we're all here to contribute and do what we can. So thank you for your time today. Thanks for the presentation, and we look forward to what comes next. Thank you.
Thanks, Chris.
Thank
Great
you,
to
Chris.
speak.
So that Q&A brings us to the end of our webinar. I think what we've established over the course of this is that vaccines play a vital part in our efforts to prevent and manage disease. And clearly the development, manufacture and regulation of these medicines is not like making nuts and bolts, as I referred to earlier on, but we rely on the efforts of pharma companies and the regulator to ensure that they remain available to us. And indeed, potentially new vaccines can come online to tackle new and emerging diseases. There's a lot of work ahead to ensure that we can continue to have those vaccines, and as end users we need to do all that we can to aid that process. Just like to say thank you to all of those who stayed online. I'm sure some people will watch elements of this online afterwards. Mary's going to drop a link to the page on our website where the full recording will be can be found. And if you're able to watch our future webinars, we look forward to you joining us in future. So thank you very much for your attention today. I hope you found it interesting and useful, and we look forward to seeing you in the future. Thank you. Goodbye.